Michael Every, welcome to The Business.
Great to be here.
You appeared on the program a few weeks ago before there was an actual conflict in Ukraine. It's a fairly different geopolitical environment than it was just a few weeks ago.
It certainly is. It's one that we flagged publicly before the war, saying that if it were to occur, there would be massive physical disruption, which we've seen, and it would be a meta crisis for markets, not just a crisis. And I think we can safely say that's also occurring.
Well, part of that is, of course, the threat of a Russian debt default. What does that actually mean in reality?
Today, not a lot. Back in 1998, when Russia defaulted last time, it blew up a couple of big hedge funds that rippled through the entire global financial system, and it got pretty shaky for a while. Today, it's not really much of a surprise. I mean, you've had Vladimir Putin signing a law overnight where they're going to effectively steal 500 jets owned by foreign companies that were left behind in Russia when air transport links were suddenly cut. So to say that there's already kind of a Berlin Wall between us and Russia is an understatement. And a debt default today, if we do get one, it's not 100% that we will, but if we do, pretty much it's a nothing burger.
Except for those who have lent Russia the money.
Yeah, but this is what happens when you lend money to people without doing your geopolitical research. And unfortunately, the market is full of analysts who love to pump the next emerging market that's great to put your money in without ever bothering to do any digging into the politics of where things could go wrong.
Beyond the Russian debt default, the oil price and China's ties to Russia certainly in focus. Brent crude keeps falling. It's sitting around $100 a barrel. How does that work, given the West is essentially in an economic battle with a major oil producer?
Well, commodities are seeing wild volatility at the moment. Nickel is perhaps the most extreme example. The entire market for that blew up in London. It's only just reopened with very tight controls on whether markets can go up and down and how much. We are seeing that volatility. Oil ramped all the way up to nearly $140 and has now come back down to 100. There may be a few conflicting forces at play there. What I will say is that everyone in the industry is firmly of the view prices are going to go back up again and stay high. No one thinks this reflects where the actual underlying market should sit at the moment. So beware that volatility and don't start thinking 100 is the final resting place.
Well, China has said it doesn't want to face US sanctions for supporting Russia, as the US is claiming. But you think its actions are telling a different story?
Well, if China is supporting Russia economically, financially, and militarily, which is what the US intelligence services allege, not myself, that's what they are saying to the world, then there will be severe consequences. And again, that's what the Americans are saying, not myself. Before the war, though, we did stress if the war started, the risks were that we would see severe sanctions on Russia, which we have seen to an unprecedented degree. But the countries who didn't join in and tried to work around them or help Russia evade them would then see secondary sanctions. And that's exactly the kind of risk that we're looking at here now with China. And it would be dramatic if that were to occur.
What would US sanctions on China mean for the global economy?
Well, it depends how severe they were and where they fell. But if we saw anything approaching what we are seeing against Russia right now, it would be complete chaos. The sell-off that we saw in some markets over the course of this week is actually a warning of that, particularly in terms of Chinese tech stocks. That's exactly what they're worried about. They're smelling that risk, as it were. Everywhere would look a lot like that. The chaos we saw during COVID, where people were fighting for toilet roll, etc., you'll be seeing that in supply chains all around the world because product supply would just dry up. So the actual financial effects and the physical effects would dwarf what we're already seeing. And what we're already seeing is already enormous.
And when you say it's already enormous, is there more to play out in terms of the fallout from the sanctions on Russia?
Hugely. First of all, a lot of this is only happening at a level you don't see day to day. We're seeing it in commodity prices, as I said. So if you look not just at the price of oil, but at the price of agricultural commodities, staples like wheat, for example, fertilizer, if you look at metals prices, all of them are skyrocketing. We need all of these to make things. or to eat or to grow food. And the inflation that's now already baked into the cake is something that we will be choking on 6 months, 9 months, 12 months from now. It will still be there for us. And that's before we get to the geopolitical side of things, because the pressure we are placing on Russia is seeing Russia push back, perhaps with China, perhaps not, to try and reshape the entire global geopolitical and geofinancial architecture, which has enormous ramifications.
Well, with that in mind, how significant is this potential deal by China to try and buy Saudi oil in renminbi, politically and financially?
Politically, very important, or geopolitically, very important. It's a clear signal from Saudi Arabia. They're very, very unhappy with what the US is doing vis-a-vis Iran. At least that's how I read it. And it certainly points to the potential for a lot of risk in that region, which would certainly push up oil prices in the long run, were we to see that. Financially, and this is maybe counterintuitive, it's not a nothing burger, because that doesn't reflect, the Saudi food. It's a nothing shawarma. That actually there really isn't a great deal to report there. It shouldn't shake markets other than psychologically. And the more you dig into it, the more you realize there isn't a lot of substance to it. Financially, politically, very much so.
Do you think the current US policy path will end up with the war it's trying to avoid, just in the same way Ukraine did?
Well, that's the risk. I'm not saying that will happen. I don't want to be, accused of calling for another war after having said that there would be one with Ukraine. But you face a really damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario vis-a-vis Iran. If the US walks away from the nuclear deal, the fear is that Iran will rush to try and get a nuclear weapon in the short term. And the only way to stop it is with military action. But if it doesn't, and it signs a deal with the US, which still appears more likely than not overall, then everyone like Saudi Arabia, like the UAE, like Israel, all of whom who feel existentially threatened by Iran and will watch it get more money, rearm, buy new missiles, start lobbying them around, and at the same time still fear that a few years from now it will get a nuclear weapon anyway, well, who's to say how that ends up? Probably not peacefully. So there's no good solution. I'm not claiming that there is one. But to presume that signing a deal just creates peace just because you've got your name on a piece of paper, unfortunately, the world doesn't work like that, as we see now in Ukraine.
Michael Every, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.